The text message from the law firm arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was watering my peace lilies. $23 million. The number blazed on my phone screen like some sort of hallucination. My arthritic fingers trembled as I set down my watering can, spilling water across the windowsill. At 62, after a modest career teaching Victorian literature to undergraduates, I had just become a millionaire many times over. Ms. Lawson, the message read, please contact our office immediately regarding the estate of Charles Whitmore. Time-sensitive documents await your signature. Uncle Charlie, my eccentric, brilliant great-uncle who had always sent me birthday cards with $20 bills even when I was well into my 50s. The investment genius who'd attended exactly 3 family gatherings in my lifetime, always leaving early with mumbled excuses about market fluctuations. He had died 3 weeks ago at 95, and I'd sent flowers but hadn't been invited to the small private service. Now I knew why. He'd been planning something far more consequential than a funeral. After 3 attempts, I managed to dial the number with my shaking hands. Patrice Lawson? The attorney's voice was crisp, efficient. I'm Jonathan Mercer, executor of your great-uncle's estate. The preliminary documents were sent to your email 30 minutes ago. But before you sign anything, Mr. Whitmore left explicit instructions that our associate, Julie Bennett, would need to speak with you privately about certain sensitive matters. Sensitive matters? I echoed. I'm not at liberty to elaborate. Ms. Bennett will contact you within 48 hours. Until then, please tell no one about your inheritance. I thanked him automatically, my mind racing. Tell no one? That was impossible. There was one person who needed to know immediately. Calvin. My son. My only child. Our relationship had grown increasingly distant over the past decade. As he climbed the corporate ladder at the prestigious Westbrook Group, his calls became less frequent, his visits perfunctory. The last time we'd spoken, 3 months ago, he'd asked for a small loan of $5,000 for what he called a temporary cash flow situation. I'd withdrawn the money from my modest retirement account. He hadn't mentioned it since. But this would change everything. $23 million. Enough to erase any financial worry Calvin might have. Enough to finally bridge the growing chasm between us. I called him immediately. Straight to voicemail. Calvin, it's Mom. I have extraordinary news. Please call me back as soon as you can. I tried again an hour later, then again. By mid-afternoon, impulsivity overcame caution. I would drive to his office in the city, surprise him, see his face when I told him our lives had been transformed overnight. The attorney's warning faded beneath my desperate hope that money, vulgar as it seemed, might finally bring my son back to me. The rain started as I merged onto the highway, fat drops smearing my windshield. I turned the wipers to high, leaning forward slightly, squinting through the downpour. My thoughts raced ahead to Calvin's reaction, rehearsing different ways to break the news. I didn't notice the black SUV until it was directly behind me, high beams blazing in my rearview mirror. Too close, dangerously close. Back off, I muttered, tapping my brakes gently. Instead of slowing, the SUV accelerated, nudging my rear bumper. My car shuddered. My hands clenched the steering wheel. It happened so quickly. Another bump, harder this time. My sedan fishtailed on the wet pavement. I fought for control as the SUV swerved alongside me. A deliberate turn of their wheel sent me spinning toward the guardrail. Metal screamed against metal. Glass shattered. The world turned upside down as my car flipped over the barrier and tumbled down the embankment. Pain, darkness, sirens wailing from what seemed like miles away. My next clear memory, antiseptic smells and beeping machines. A doctor's solemn face floating above me. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, surgery successful, very fortunate. I drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time I surfaced, I asked the same question. My son. Has anyone called my son? On the 3rd day, a nurse with kind eyes helped me dial Calvin's number. My fingers were immobilized in bandages, my arms mottled with bruises. She held the phone to my ear as it rang. Calvin Lawson, he answered, his voice clipped, professional. Calvin, it's Mom, I whispered, my throat raw from the breathing tube they'd only recently removed. I've been in an accident. I'm at Mercy General. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Mom, I'm heading into a meeting with the board. Can this wait? I've been here for 3 days. It was serious. I thought you should know. Another pause. I could hear papers shuffling. Look, I don't have time or money for drama right now. Things are extremely tight and I'm up for a promotion. I'll try to swing by. Sometime soon. The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the ceiling as the nurse gently returned the phone to its cradle. She squeezed my shoulder lightly, her eyes full of pity I couldn't bear to acknowledge. $23 million, and my son couldn't spare 30 minutes to visit his critically injured mother. I closed my eyes, letting morphine pull me back toward oblivion. In the haze between consciousness and darkness, a strange thought surfaced. Maybe it wasn't an accident at all. Maybe Uncle Charlie's sensitive matters had something to do with my car careening off the highway just hours after I'd learned of my inheritance. But that was paranoia, surely. The medication talking, wasn't it? 5 days in a hospital teaches you about invisibility. I became background noise, the quiet patient in room 412 whose call button rarely lit up. Dr. Torres visited twice daily, her forehead creased with concern that transcended medical duty. We had taught at the same university for decades before our respective retirements. She in biochemistry, me in English literature. Now she monitored my healing with the fierce attention of a 30-year friendship. The police report calls it a single-vehicle accident, Teresa said, scrolling through her tablet as she sat beside my bed. Wet roads, possible hydroplaning. It wasn't, I whispered, careful not to be overheard by the nurse changing my IV. Someone ran me off the road. Teresa's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. Are you certain? A black SUV, deliberately. Have you told the police? I shook my head slightly, wincing at the movement. They'll think I'm confused, or worse, senile. Patrice. No one would believe me, I interrupted. A 62-year-old woman with a concussion claiming attempted murder? I need to understand why before I say anything. Teresa squeezed my hand gently, mindful of the IV. Calvin still hasn't visited? The question stung more than my fractured ribs. No, I've called him 6 times. Don't, I said. He made his priorities clear. Teresa's expression hardened. She had never particularly liked Calvin, though she'd maintained a polite facade for my sake. His absence now had shattered even that pretense. The inheritance, she murmured. Could it be connected to your accident? The same question had been circling my mind during the long, pain-filled nights. I don't know. The attorney said someone named Julie Bennett needed to speak with me about sensitive matters before I signed anything. Julie Bennett? Teresa frowned. Why does that name sound familiar? Before she could elaborate, a commotion in the hallway drew our attention. A male voice, insistent and authoritative, overrode the nurse's protests. I'm her son. I don't care about visiting hours. Calvin. Teresa rose, positioning herself almost protectively between my bed and the door. Her posture communicated volumes. The doctor ready to defend her patient, the friend shielding the wounded. My son appeared in the doorway, impeccably dressed in what I recognized as an expensive suit, his dark hair perfectly styled. For a moment, I glimpsed the little boy who once brought me dandelions before time and ambition had hardened his features into a stranger's face. Mother, he said, his gaze cataloging my injuries with clinical detachment. You look better than I expected, given that I almost died. The words escaped before I could temper them. A flicker of something, guilt, annoyance, crossed his face. I've been swamped with a major acquisition. The timing of your situation was unfortunate. Teresa made a small sound of disbelief. Calvin glanced at her as if just noticing her presence. Dr. Rodriguez, still hovering, I see. Still showing up, she replied evenly. The tension stretched between them until a woman appeared behind Calvin. Slender, elegant, with intelligent eyes that assessed the room quickly. She wore a cream-colored dress that whispered of quiet wealth, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. You must be Calvin's mother, she said, stepping forward with a warm smile that transformed her features. I'm Julie, his wife. I've been looking forward to meeting you, though I wish it were under better circumstances. Julie. The name registered like a static shock. Julie Bennett? The attorney's associate? Calvin shifted uncomfortably. Yes, well, we were married 3 months ago. Small ceremony. In Barbados, Julie added, moving closer to my bedside. Calvin said it would be too difficult for you to travel, but I insisted we should visit as soon as we returned. Another lie exposed. Calvin had never mentioned a wedding, let alone invited me. As Julie reached my side, her eyes met mine directly for the first time. The warm smile froze, blood draining from her face so rapidly I feared she might faint. Her hand, extended toward mine, trembled visibly. "Are you all right?" I asked. She stared at me with naked shock, her composure completely shattered. You, she stammered, then stopped abruptly. "I'm sorry," she finally managed. You look exactly like someone I used to know." Calvin frowned, looking between us with confused irritation. "Julie, what's going on?" She seemed not to hear him, her gaze locked on my face with an intensity that made me deeply uneasy. "You're Patrice Lawson," she whispered. "Charles Whitmore's great niece." The room went silent. Calvin's expression hardened into something I couldn't read. "How do you know about Uncle Charlie?" I asked carefully. Julie opened her mouth, then closed it. Something passed across her features, calculation, decision, before she composed herself with visible effort. "Your son mentioned him," she said smoothly, though her voice still carried a slight tremor. "I'm sorry for your loss. Were you close?" Before I could answer, Calvin interjected, "Mother, we need to discuss any paperwork or documents you might have received recently, for tax purposes." Teresa stepped forward. "Patrice needs rest, not financial discussions." "It's important," Calvin insisted, scanning the room as if searching for something. "Has anyone sent you any documents? Left you anything to sign?" The monitors betrayed my quickening pulse. I thought of the attorney's warning. "Tell no one." "Nothing," I lied, watching my son's face carefully. "Just medical forms." Julie's eyes never left mine. A silent communication I couldn't decipher passing between us. "We should go," she said suddenly, taking Calvin's arm. "Your mother needs rest. We'll come back tomorrow." As they turned to leave, Julie glanced back, her expression now deliberately neutral. "It was illuminating to meet you, Mrs. Lawson." The door closed behind them, leaving only the beeping monitors and Teresa's concerned face. "Patrice," she said quietly, "I think you're in danger." After they left, Teresa insisted on staying overnight in the recliner beside my bed. "Just as a precaution," she said, though we both understood it was more than that. Something had shifted in my hospital room, something in Julie's shocked recognition, in Calvin's too urgent questions about documents. A subtle menace had entered my sterile sanctuary. Sleep came in broken fragments, punctuated by nurses checking vitals and pain medication wearing off. In those twilight moments between consciousness and dreams, Uncle Charlie's face kept appearing, not as the elderly man I'd last seen years ago, but as he had looked in my childhood, sharp-eyed and serious as he told me, "Always question what seems convenient, Patrice, especially kindness from those who stand to gain from it." Morning brought a young police officer to my room. Officer Daniels looked barely old enough to drive, let alone carry a badge, but his questions were precise and thorough. "You reported that another vehicle intentionally forced you off the road," he said, notebook open on his knee. "Can you describe it again?" "Black SUV, tinted windows, no license plate visible from my angle." "And you're certain the contact was deliberate?" I met his skeptical gaze directly. 3 separate times they struck my vehicle. "That's not an accident." He nodded, writing something down. "Any reasons someone might want to harm you, Ms. Lawson?" The question hung in the air. 23 million reasons flickered through my mind, but something, intuition perhaps, held me back from mentioning the inheritance. Instead, I shook my head. "Not that I'm aware of." "We'll investigate," he said, closing his notebook. "Highway Patrol is checking for traffic cameras in that area. I should warn you, though, that particular stretch is notoriously under-surveilled." How convenient, I thought, but kept my expression neutral. "Thank you, officer." After he left, a hospital volunteer delivered a small arrangement of yellow roses with a card from Julie. "Wishing you a swift recovery. Looking forward to getting to know you better." The handwriting was elegant, controlled, with no hint of the shock that had overtaken her features yesterday. Teresa returned mid-morning, carrying my laptop and phone charger from home. "Thought you might need distractions," she explained, setting them up on the overbed table. "Any word from Calvin?" "Not directly." I gestured to the flowers. "His wife sent those." Teresa examined the card, her expression thoughtful. Julie Bennett Lawson. I knew that name sounded familiar. She pulled out her tablet, typing quickly. "Here, Bennett Law Associates, specializing in corporate whistleblower cases and financial fraud. Julie Bennett is their rising star. The tablet displayed a professional website with Julie's photograph, poised, confident, nothing like the woman who had nearly collapsed at my bedside. A corporate fraud attorney married to a Westbrook Group executive, I murmured. Interesting combination. Almost contradictory, Teresa agreed. Like a conservation officer marrying a poacher. While Teresa stepped out to speak with my doctor, I turned to my laptop. The email from Mercer and Associates sat prominently in my inbox, unopened. I clicked it with trepidation. The inheritance details were straightforward. $23 million in diversified assets, property holdings in 3 states, and a sealed packet of personal effects to be delivered by hand. The document required only my electronic signature to begin the transfer process. My cursor hovered over the signature line, hesitating. Uncle Charlie's warning from childhood echoed again. Question, what seems convenient? Instead of signing, I opened a new browser window and searched Charles Whitmore Investment Fraud, Westbrook. The results made my blood run cold. Financial blogs from the past year chronicled Uncle Charlie's growing obsession with exposing what he called systematic corruption at the Westbrook Group. He had publicly accused them of operating a complex Ponzi scheme that defrauded investors of billions. The company had dismissed him as a disgruntled former associate suffering cognitive decline. The latest article, dated just days before his death, mentioned that Whitmore claimed to possess irrefutable evidence that would bring Westbrook's house of cards tumbling down, evidence he apparently intended to pass to me. I closed the laptop as Teresa returned, not wanting her to see my shaking hands or the tears threatening at the corners of my eyes. "They're discharging you tomorrow," she announced. "You'll stay with me, of course." "I need to go home," I said firmly. "My own space." "Patrice, you can barely walk. And after what happened, I'll hire a home health aide." I cut her off gently but firmly. "You've done enough." She recognized the stubborn set of my jaw, the same expression I'd worn when fighting for tenure, when raising Calvin alone after his father died, when refusing a second mastectomy that doctors insisted would only marginally improve my survival odds. Teresa sighed in capitulation. "At least let me arrange security cameras," she conceded. "Front and back entrances." I agreed, relief mixing with a growing sense of dread. My quiet academic life had somehow transformed into something dangerous, something with stakes I was only beginning to comprehend. My phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. "Don't sign anything. Don't trust anyone who asks about documents. I'll contact you securely when you're home. JB, Julie Bennett, my daughter-in-law, the attorney connected to Uncle Charlie, the woman married to my son." I deleted the message immediately, then looked up to find Teresa watching me intently. "What are you not telling me?" she asked softly. "Everything is fine," I lied, knowing it might be the last ordinary falsehood I ever told my oldest friend, before the truly extraordinary deceptions began. Because one thing had become crystalline clear. Whatever had killed Uncle Charlie was now coming for me, and somehow, my only son was caught in the middle of it. The journey from hospital to home left me breathless with pain, despite the cushioned seats of Teresa's luxury sedan. Each bump in the road sent shockwaves through my mending bones. My modest Victorian cottage, once simply home, now seemed different, somehow both sanctuary and potential trap. "The security company finished installation this morning," Teresa said, helping me navigate the porch steps with my walker. "Cameras at all entry points, motion sensors, direct line to police." "It's overkill," I protested weakly, though secretly grateful. "It's necessary," she countered, unlocking my front door. "The home health aide arrives at 4. I've vetted her personally. 20 years of experience, impeccable references. Inside, everything looked exactly as I'd left it that fateful morning. Watering can still on the windowsill, peace lilies drooping from neglect, half-finished cup of tea petrified on the side table. Yet something felt subtly wrong. The air disturbed in a way I couldn't articulate. "Someone's been here," I whispered. Teresa frowned. "That's impossible. I've had the only key, and the locks weren't tampered with. Check my office." She disappeared down the hallway while I lowered myself carefully onto the sofa, fighting dizziness. When Teresa returned, her expression confirmed my suspicions. "Your desk drawers were searched. Carefully. Everything replaced, but not quite in the correct order. The filing cabinet? Untouched, as far as I can tell." I nodded, oddly relieved. The cabinet contained 30 years of mundane paperwork, tax returns, medical records, Calvin's childhood report cards, nothing of value to anyone else. But my desk might have contained Uncle Charlie's documents had I received them before the accident. After Teresa reluctantly departed for her hospital shift, promising to return that evening, I sat in stillness, listening to my house settle around me. The grandfather clock in the hallway, my father's prized possession, marked time with metronomic precision, each tick a heartbeat of my diminished life. At precisely 2:17 p.m., my burner phone chimed, the prepaid device Teresa had purchased just in case, separate from my regular cell. The message contained only an address and time, Lakeside Park, East Bench, 4:30 p.m. No signature needed. Julie, the home health aide, Mrs. Abernathy, a no-nonsense woman with salt and pepper hair and forearms like a stevedore, arrived at 4 o'clock. After helping me change my bandages and take medication, she seemed startled by my request. "You want to go to the park? Today?" "Just for some fresh air," I said, affecting a frail smile. "The doctor recommended short walks. You'll accompany me, of course." She looked dubious but acquiesced. 20 minutes maximum, and we take the wheelchair. Lakeside Park was mercifully close, just 3 blocks from my cottage. Mrs. Abernathy pushed my wheelchair along tree-lined paths, huffing slightly on the gentle inclines. At the eastern edge, I spotted a solitary figure on a bench overlooking the water. "I'd like to rest here," I told Mrs. Abernathy, gesturing toward the bench. "Perhaps you could find us some water. There's a vendor near the playground." Once she reluctantly departed, Julie quickly moved to my side, her elegant appearance replaced by nondescript clothing. Jeans, hoodie, sunglasses, hair hidden beneath a baseball cap. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice low. "They're watching your house. Who's watching? And why are you meeting me like this? What is your real connection to Uncle Charlie?" Julie's composed facade cracked slightly. "I'm genuinely Calvin's wife. That part isn't a lie. But I'm also the attorney Charles Whitmore hired to protect you and deliver certain documents. You married my son as part of your legal work?" The absurdity nearly made me laugh, despite the circumstances. "No," she replied sharply. "I met Calvin at a charity function last year, long before your uncle approached our firm. The connection was coincidental. I don't believe in coincidences anymore." "Neither do I." Julie glanced toward the path where Mrs. Abernathy would return. "The important thing is that your accident wasn't random. Westbrook's people believe you already have the documents." "What documents? What do they contain?" "Evidence of systematic fraud at the highest levels of Westbrook Group. Your uncle spent years compiling it. Falsified financial statements, offshore accounts, manipulated assets. Everything needed to prove they've been running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme worth billions." I felt suddenly lightheaded, and not from my injuries. "And Calvin? Is he involved?" Pain flickered across Julie's features. "That's complicated. I believe Victor Westbrook has been grooming him, involving him gradually in questionable transactions. Calvin likely doesn't understand the full scope of what he's participating in." "You're defending him," I observed. "I'm trying to save him," she corrected. "And you. The documents are being delivered tomorrow by a courier who worked with your uncle. Once you have them, I can help you bring everything to the Securities and Exchange Commission." Mrs. Abernathy appeared in the distance, carrying bottled water. "What about you?" I asked quickly. "Won't this expose your connection to the case?" "Yes," Julie said simply. "My career at the firm will be over. My marriage, too, most likely." "Then why?" "Because it's the right thing to do." She stood, adjusting her cap. "And because I've grown to care about Calvin, despite everything. He deserves a chance to make this right." As she walked away, blending seamlessly into a group of joggers, Mrs. Abernathy returned, frowning suspiciously. "Who was that?" "Just a fellow bird-watcher," I lied, gazing toward the lake, where a heron stood motionless in the shallows, patient and watchful, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Sleep eluded me that night, pain medication notwithstanding. Mrs. Abernathy snored gently from the guest room, her presence both reassuring and constraining. I lay awake, mentally cataloging the impossible revelations of the past week. $23 million, a deliberate attempt on my life, my son potentially involved in financial crimes, and his wife, a woman I'd never met until days ago, secretly working to protect me. Had my life always contained these seeds of intrigue, dormant until Uncle Charlie's death? Or had I simply been so absorbed in my quiet academic existence that I'd failed to notice the corruption encircling my only child? Dawn brought a thin, colorless rain that streaked my bedroom windows. Mrs. Abernathy helped me bathe and dress, her efficiency both comforting and somewhat dehumanizing. By 10 o'clock, I was settled in my reading chair beside the bay window, pretending to read Jane Austen while actually watching the street through rain-blurred glass. At precisely 11:17 a.m., a delivery truck stopped in front of my house. The driver, young, bearded, wearing a standard courier uniform, approached with a medium-sized package. Mrs. Abernathy answered the door, signed for the delivery, and brought the package to me. "From Mercer and Associates," she noted, reading the return label before setting it beside me. My heart raced. Uncle Charlie's documents. I kept my expression neutral, thanking her before suggesting she prepare lunch. Once alone, I examined the package without opening it. Heavier than expected, professionally sealed. What secrets did it contain that were worth killing for? I hid it beneath an Afghan just as my phone rang. "Calvin. Mother, I need to see you, today." His voice carried an unfamiliar edge, fear disguised as urgency. "I'm quite tired, Calvin. The doctor recommends minimal visitation." "This is important," he lowered his voice. "It's about Uncle Charlie." A chill ran through me despite the warmth of my sweater. "What about him?" "Not over the phone. I'll be there at 2. The line went dead before I could respond. I glanced at the hidden package, then at the clock. 2 hours to examine whatever explosive evidence Uncle Charlie had collected before Calvin arrived. But first, I needed privacy. When Mrs. Abernathy brought my soup and medication, I made a performance of taking the pain pills, then discreetly removed them from my mouth after she departed. I needed clarity, not sedation. 30 minutes later, I called out weakly, "Mrs. Abernathy, could you fetch my cardigan from the bedroom closet? The blue one. I'm feeling chilled." The moment she disappeared down the hallway, I quickly transferred the package to the hollow space inside my father's grandfather clock. I had just resumed my position when she returned, cardigan in hand. "Thank you," I said, affecting drowsiness. "I think I'll nap now. Those pills make me so sleepy." She nodded approvingly. "I'll be in the kitchen. Call if you need anything." I closed my eyes, listening to her footsteps recede, then counted to 300 before carefully rising. The walk to the clock required excruciating effort without my walker, each step sending jolts of pain through my healing ribs. Once there, I retrieved the package and made my painstaking way to the bathroom, the one room where privacy was guaranteed. Inside, I locked the door and sat on the closed toilet lid, hands trembling as I opened the package. It contained a sealed manila envelope and a smaller, personal envelope with my name handwritten in Uncle Charlie's distinctive script. I opened the personal letter first. "My dear Patrice, if you're reading this, I am gone, and you face danger I had hoped to shield you from." Inside the sealed envelope is evidence of criminal activity at the Westbrook Group spanning 2 decades. This information will shatter lives, including possibly your son's. For that, I am deeply sorry. Calvin was deliberately recruited by Victor Westbrook after I began my investigation. I believe Victor intended him as both leverage and distraction. Your son may be involved in illegal activities, but I suspect he doesn't comprehend the true extent of the fraud. Trust Julie Bennett. She is one of the few attorneys with both the expertise and integrity to handle this properly. The decision of how to proceed rests with you now. Your loving uncle, Charlie. I pressed the letter to my chest, eyes burning with unshed tears. Uncle Charlie had known about Calvin's involvement, yet still entrusted me with this moral quandary. The sealed manila envelope felt impossibly heavy in my hands, Pandora's box wrapped in office supplies. Before I could open it, someone knocked at the bathroom door. "Ms. Lawson?" Mrs. Abernathy called. "Are you all right? You've been in there quite a while." "Just a moment," I called, hurriedly replacing everything in the outer packaging. When I emerged, leaning heavily on the countertop, Mrs. Abernathy's concerned expression shifted subtly as she noticed the package tucked awkwardly under my arm. "Let me help you with that," she said, reaching for it. I clutched it tighter. "No need. Just some old photos I want to show Calvin later." Something flickered in her eyes, doubt, suspicion, before her professional demeanor reasserted itself. "Your son called. He's running early. Should be here in 20 minutes. As she helped me back to my chair, my mind raced. Had I imagined her reaction? Was I becoming paranoid, seeing conspiracies where only ordinary concern existed? The grandfather clock chimed once, marking the half hour, 90 minutes until Calvin's scheduled arrival, yet he was already on his way. I needed to hide the package again, somewhere he wouldn't think to look. But first, I needed to know exactly what Uncle Charlie had uncovered, and whether my son was merely a pawn in Victor Westbrook's game or something far worse. Mrs. Abernathy hovered nearby, her attention flicking periodically to the package clutched in my lap. I needed to examine the contents before Calvin arrived, but not with watchful eyes monitoring my every move. "I'm feeling quite fatigued," I said, feigning a wince as I shifted in my chair. "I think I'd like to rest in my bedroom before Calvin arrives." "Of course." She moved to help me stand. "I'll check on you in 15 minutes. Once in my bedroom, door firmly closed, I moved with as much speed as my broken body allowed. From my nightstand drawer, I extracted a small pearl-handled letter opener, a gift from Teresa on my 30th year of teaching. With surgical precision, I slid open the manila envelope, careful not to tear anything that might reveal my intrusion. Inside were USB drives, financial statements, and photographs. Dozens of them, showing Victor Westbrook meeting with various officials in settings that appeared deliberately covert. Several featured Calvin, looking uncomfortable as he handed over envelopes to stone-faced men in expensive suits. The timestamps showed a progression, my son's involvement deepening over the past year. The financial documents were complex, but even my untrained eye could recognize the patterns of deception. Funds moved between shell companies, investor returns fabricated from new investments rather than actual profits, balance sheets that couldn't possibly balance. Most damning was a series of emails between Victor and Calvin discussing what they called controlled disclosures and narrative management regarding Westbrook's finances. In one, Victor praised Calvin for handling our friends at the Regulatory Commission and mentioned a special compensation package for his discretion. My son was not merely involved, he was complicit. With trembling hands, I gathered everything, returning it precisely as I'd found it. From my jewelry box, I removed a small key that opened the hidden compartment in my antique vanity, a space where I'd once stored love letters from Calvin's father, then later the painful mammogram results I'd initially hidden from my teenage son. Now it would hold evidence of his crimes. The compartment clicked open, just as a car door slammed outside my window. I peered through the curtains to see not Calvin's sleek German sedan, but a black SUV idling at the curb. The same type of vehicle that had forced me off the road. My breath caught. Through tinted windows, I could make out a driver and passenger both watching my house. When my bedroom curtain moved, the passenger pointed directly at my window. No time for finesse. I shoved the package into the compartment, closed it, and had just replaced the vanity's false bottom when Mrs. Abernathy knocked. "Your son is here," she announced through the door, "and he's brought a gentleman with him, Victor Westbrook." It had to be. "Tell them I'll be right out," I called, fighting to keep my voice steady. In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face, assessing my reflection. The bruising had faded to yellowish smudges, but fear had etched new lines around my eyes. I looked exactly like what I was, a battered woman in her 60s far out of her depth in a dangerous game. But I'd faced intimidation before. Academic politics could be surprisingly vicious, especially for a female department chair in the 1990s. I straightened my cardigan, applied a touch of lipstick, and took 3 deep breaths. When I entered the living room, Calvin stood near the fireplace, tension evident in every line of his body. Beside him was not Victor, but a younger man, muscular, expressionless, with the hyper-vigilant posture of private security. "Mother," Calvin said, his voice artificially bright, "you're looking better." "Amazing what nearly dying will do for one's complexion," I replied dryly. "Who's your friend?" "Marcus Fisher, Mrs. Lawson," the man said, not offering his hand. "Mr. Westbrook's chief of security. I'm here to ensure everything goes smoothly." How thoughtful. I lowered myself carefully into my reading chair. "And what exactly are we ensuring goes smoothly, Calvin?" My son glanced at Fisher, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "We need to discuss Uncle Charlie," Calvin began, pacing nervously. "He may have sent you some materials that could be misinterpreted." "Misinterpreted," I repeated. Interesting choice of words. The old man had become confused, Fisher interjected. Paranoid, making wild accusations against respected financial institutions, including your employer. Calvin stopped pacing. Mother, this is serious. If Charlie sent you documents, they could contain proprietary information that, taken out of context, might seem concerning. Concerning enough to run someone off the road? I asked quietly. Fisher's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Calvin looked genuinely shocked. What are you talking about? Someone deliberately forced me off the highway the day I learned about my inheritance. I held his gaze steadily. A black SUV, like the one currently parked outside my house. Calvin's face drained of color. He turned to Fisher. You said it was an accident. Fisher's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The police report confirmed hydroplaning, sir. Because that's what they were told, I countered. No witnesses, no cameras in that stretch. Convenient, wouldn't you say? Mrs. Abernathy appeared in the doorway. Everything all right, Ms. Lawson? You seem distressed. We're fine, I assured her, though I noticed she kept her phone visibly in hand, ready to call for help if needed. Calvin collapsed onto the sofa, running his hands through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his childhood self that my heart ached despite everything. Mother, please, if Uncle Charlie sent you anything, just give it to me, for your own safety. My safety, I echoed. Is that a concern now? It's always been a concern, Fisher said smoothly. Mr. Whitmore was making powerful enemies, enemies who might assume his next of kin inherited more than just his money. The threat, though veiled, hung in the air between us. Calvin wouldn't meet my eyes now, his gaze fixed on his expensive shoes. My son was frightened, not for me, but of what might happen if I didn't cooperate. Calvin, I said softly, we need to talk, alone. Fisher stepped forward. That's not advisable. It wasn't a suggestion, I replied, steel entering my voice. Either you leave us to speak privately, or I call the police and report suspicious persons on my property. Your choice. Fisher's face hardened into a mask of barely contained anger. For a moment I thought he might refuse, or worse. Then Calvin surprised me. Wait in the car, Marcus. His voice carried an authority I'd never heard before. This is my mother. I need 15 minutes. The security man hesitated, clearly conflicted between his orders and the chain of command. Finally, he nodded curtly. 15 minutes. Then we proceed as planned. As Fisher departed, Mrs. Abernathy stepped into the vacuum of his presence. Shall I bring tea? That would be lovely, I said, grateful for her intuition. Perhaps it could take you 20 minutes to prepare it? Earl Grey is in the far pantry. Understanding flickered in her eyes. She wasn't just a home health aide. She was becoming an ally. Of course, Ms. Lawson, 20 minutes minimum for a proper brew. When we were finally alone, Calvin seemed to physically shrink, the corporate facade crumbling to reveal the boy I'd raised. He buried his face in his hands. You have no idea what you're involved in, he whispered. Then tell me, I said, keeping my voice gentle despite the storm of emotions, anger, disappointment, fear, churning beneath my calm exterior. Tell me how my son became entangled with people who would try to kill his mother. His head snapped up. I didn't know about the accident. I swear to God, Mother, Victor told me you were being monitored, not harmed. Monitored, I repeated, because of what Uncle Charlie might have sent me. Calvin nodded miserably. You have to understand, Westbrook isn't just a company, it's an institution. Victor controls judges, regulators, politicians. When your uncle started making accusations, Victor said he'd handle it legally. I never imagined that he'd resort to murder, I finished quietly. Of an elderly man? Of me? Tears welled in Calvin's eyes. I'm in too deep. At first, it was just connecting Victor with the right people, helping smooth regulatory hurdles. Then documents needed adjustments, small changes to satisfy auditors. Fraud. I told myself it was just creative accounting, he continued, voice hollow. By the time I realized what was really happening, I was already implicated. If Westbrook falls, I go to prison. And Julie? Does she know what you've done? A bitter laugh escaped him. Julie, God, that's another nightmare. She married me believing I was just another corporate drone. When she realizes what I've been party to, she'll leave, after she helps prosecute me. You love her, I observed, seeing genuine pain in his expression. She's the best thing that ever happened to me, he admitted. And I've ruined it, along with everything else. The grandfather clock chimed softly, marking our dwindling time. Outside, Fisher would be growing impatient, perhaps already contemplating his next move. Calvin, What does Victor expect you to find here? He ran a hand through his hair again. A nervous habit from childhood. Uncle Charlie's documents. Victor is convinced they contain everything. Account numbers, transaction records, names, dates. Enough to destroy Westbrook and everyone connected to it, including you. Calvin nodded, misery etched into every line of his face. If those documents become public, hundreds of people lose their jobs, thousands lose investments, and I go to federal prison for at least a decade. He looked up, eyes pleading. Mother, I'm not a good person. I've made terrible choices, but I'm not a killer. I didn't know what Victor was planning for you or Uncle Charlie. I studied my son, the boy I'd taught to read, to ride a bicycle, to dance for his junior prom, the man who had grown increasingly distant as he climbed corporate ladders, who had taken money from my modest retirement account without a second thought, who had dismissed my accident with callous indifference, and now the broken figure before me, finally confronting the consequences of years of moral compromise. What happens if you return to Victor empty-handed? Fear flashed across his features. Best case, I become the scapegoat. Worst case, I have an unfortunate accident myself. The clock ticked relentlessly. Outside, Fisher would be checking his watch. Mrs. Abernathy was giving us as much time as she could reasonably stretch, but soon our privacy would end. I made my decision. Listen carefully, I said, leaning forward despite the pain in my ribs. I do have Uncle Charlie's documents, but I won't give them to Victor. Mother, you don't understand what he's capable of. Better than you think, I interrupted. But there's another way. Julie has a plan to bring everything to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Calvin went absolutely still. Julie, what are you talking about? Your wife was working with Uncle Charlie before she met you. She's a specialist in whistleblower cases. The blood drained from his face. That's not possible. She told me herself. She wants to help you, Calvin. She believes you can still make this right. He stood abruptly, pacing in tight circles like a caged animal. This whole time? Our entire relationship was just professional interest? A way to get to Westbrook? No, I said firmly. She met you before Charlie approached her firm, but now she's caught between her professional obligations and her feelings for you. Anger, betrayal, and confusion warred on his face. Why should I believe any of this? For all I know, you're trying to manipulate me. Because I'm your mother, I said simply. And despite everything, I still love you. You have a choice now, Calvin. Help Victor continue this fraud and become even more complicit, or work with Julie and me to end it. His expression crumpled. There's no good outcome for me either way. There's doing the right thing, I countered. Something your father would have expected. At the mention of his father, Calvin flinched visibly. Outside, a car door slammed. Fisher's patience had evidently expired. We're out of time, I said urgently. I need your decision now. Are you with us or with Victor? For one long moment, Calvin stood frozen in indecision, the weight of his choices visibly crushing him. The front door opened, Fisher returning, and something shifted in my son's eyes. Resolution, perhaps, or resignation. I need to see these documents myself, he whispered urgently. I need to know exactly what they contain before I can decide. Not quite commitment, but not rejection either. Before I could respond, Fisher appeared in the doorway, his bulk filling the frame with unspoken menace. Time's up, he announced. Mr. Westbrook is expecting an update. Calvin straightened, his corporate mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. My mother and I have reached an understanding. She'll provide what we need, but she requires time to locate everything. Fisher's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Where are the documents, Mrs. Lawson? Not here, I lied smoothly. My friend Teresa has them in her safe deposit box. A precaution after my accident. Then we'll visit this Teresa together, Fisher said, stepping toward me. Calvin moved between us. That won't be necessary. My mother has agreed to retrieve everything tomorrow. We should report back to Victor. He turned to me with a performance of filial concern. Mother, you should rest now. I'll return in the morning to handle this. The subtext was clear. He needed time to think, to process the revelations about Julie, to decide where his loyalties truly lay. I nodded, playing along. Of course, dear. I'm feeling quite fatigued. Fisher didn't move. Mr. Westbrook was explicit. We don't leave without the documents. And you'll have them, Calvin assured him, once my mother has recovered enough to access them. Pressing her now will only delay matters. A tense silence stretched between them, the subordinate challenging the authority of his superior's son. Finally, Fisher reached for his phone. "I'll need to clear this with Mr. Westbrook." As he stepped into the hallway to make his call, Calvin leaned close to me, his voice barely audible. "If what you're saying about Julie is true, tell her to meet us at Riverside Park tomorrow, 10 a.m., Northern Gazebo." He pulled back, eyes searching mine. "I'm not promising anything. I just need to understand what I'm facing." Fisher returned, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Westbrook has agreed to your timeline, Mrs. Lawson, but he's sending additional security to monitor your house overnight, for your protection." The last words dripped with insincerity. Calvin shot me a warning look. "Play along." "How thoughtful," I said, matching Fisher's false pleasantness. "Though I already have my health aide staying with me." "Mrs. Abernathy, yes," Fisher smiled thinly. "We've run a background check. Former military nurse. Impressive credentials." The casual revelation that they'd investigated my healthcare provider sent a chill through me. How long had they been watching? What else did they know? After they departed, Calvin with a stiff, formal hug that felt like a performance for Fisher's benefit, Mrs. Abernathy emerged from the kitchen, tea tray in hand. "I gathered they won't be staying for Earl Grey," she observed dryly. "No?" I sank into my chair, suddenly exhausted. "But we have other concerns. They're posting surveillance outside." She nodded, unsurprised. "I noticed the second SUV arriving as they left. 2 men, east corner. You're very observant for a home health aide. 20 years in military intelligence before nursing school teaches you to notice details." She set the tea tray down and pulled up a chair. "Now, would you like to tell me what's really going on, Professor Lawson? Because that man who just left isn't here for your medical well-being." I studied her carefully. "Why should I trust you?" "Because Dr. Torres personally selected me from a very short list of people she trusts with her life, and because I've been watching that security man evaluate your home's entry points like he's planning a breach, not a protection detail." Decision time. I needed allies, and Teresa's judgment had never failed me before. "I need to make a call first," I said. When Teresa confirmed that Mrs. Abernathy, call me Helen, please, was indeed a former military intelligence officer who'd retrained as a nurse after a back injury ended her field career, I made my choice. I need to contact Julie Lawson immediately, without anyone outside knowing. Then I need to remove something from my vanity without being observed through the windows. Helen didn't bat an eye. "Give me 15 minutes to create a diversion. When you hear commotion outside, move quickly." She disappeared into the guest room, emerging with a small duffel bag I hadn't seen before. From it, she extracted what looked like standard emergency flares. "Smoke markers," she explained. "Non-toxic, but very convincing. The men outside will have to investigate when they seem to originate from your garage." While she prepared, I called Julie using the burner phone, relaying Calvin's message about Riverside Park. "Did he commit to helping us?" Julie asked, hope evident in her voice. "Not explicitly, but he's willing to listen. He knows about your connection to Uncle Charlie now." A sharp intake of breath. "How did he react? Hurt? Confused? Betrayed?" I hesitated. "He loves you, Julie. That much is genuine." She was silent for a moment. "I never meant to fall in love with him," she finally said. "It complicated things. Love usually does." I glanced toward the window where Helen was monitoring our unwanted guardians. "Can you bring SEC representatives to the meeting tomorrow? Someone who can offer Calvin a deal in exchange for testimony against Victor?" "Possibly. But Patrice, you need to understand something. The documents you have aren't just evidence of financial fraud. They also contain proof of bribery, blackmail, even connections to organized crime. Victor Westbrook isn't just facing financial penalties, he's facing decades in federal prison. People like that don't go quietly." Helen signaled me. 1 minute until diversion." "I understand the danger," I said quickly. "But right now, I need to secure those documents and make it through the night. Tomorrow at 10, Riverside Park." Seconds after hanging up, smoke began billowing from the side of my house. Helen nodded sharply. "Now." I moved as quickly as my injured body would allow, retrieving Uncle Charlie's package from the vanity compartment. By the time I returned to the living room, Helen was watching through the blinds as both security men abandoned their vehicle to investigate the smoke. "We have maybe 3 minutes," she said. "Where do you want to hide it?" "Not here," I decided. "They'll search the house the moment we leave tomorrow. We need to get it out now." Helen assessed the package quickly. "How valuable?" $23 million and multiple federal prosecutions. She nodded once, her military efficiency reasserting itself. The drainage culvert behind your property connects to the main system. I noticed it earlier when checking the perimeter. We can use that. I can barely walk, let alone crawl through drainage pipes, I reminded her. You won't have to. She moved to the kitchen, returning with a large waterproof freezer bag. The documents go in here. I'll make the delivery while you create a second diversion. As she carefully sealed the package, I realized what she was proposing. You're leaving me alone with them outside? Only briefly. Those men are focused on stopping you from leaving, not following me. I'll exit through your bathroom window, make the drop, and return before they realize I was gone. She handed me a cell phone. If anything happens, call this number. It connects directly to Dr. Torres and emergency services simultaneously. The security men would return soon, their patience for smoke diversions limited. Who should we send the documents to? Julie? Helen shook her head. Too risky. If they're watching your son, they're watching his wife. She considered for a moment. Dr. Torres has a nephew on the police force. Detective, Organized Crime Division. The package goes to him. I wrote Teresa's nephew's name and badge number on the waterproof bag, along with a brief note explaining the contents were evidence of financial crimes connected to my recent accident. As Helen prepared to leave, I grabbed her wrist. Thank you, I said simply, for believing me. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. In my experience, literature professors rarely fabricate corporate conspiracies. She glanced out the window. The men are returning. Make noise in the front rooms. Act frustrated about the smoke. I'll be back within 20 minutes. After she slipped away, I shuffled to the front door, calling out irritably about faulty wiring and ancient garages for the benefit of anyone listening. Through the window, I could see the security men resuming their positions, now more alert than before. One spoke into his radio, reporting the incident to someone higher up the chain, I assumed. The minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. I made a show of checking smoke damage, moving between windows where I could be seen, maintaining the illusion that both Helen and I remained focused on household concerns. 18 minutes later, I was counting every second. Helen reappeared in the hallway as silently as she had vanished. Package delivered to the rendezvous point, she reported quietly. Dr. Torres's nephew will retrieve it within the hour. And now? Now we prepare for tomorrow. She drew the curtains closed. They'll expect you to leave the house to retrieve the documents from your friend's safe deposit box. We need to make that look legitimate. We spent the next hour constructing a plausible narrative. Phone calls to Teresa on speakerphone, loud enough to be overheard, arranging to meet at her bank tomorrow morning. Helen periodically checked the surveillance outside, noting when shifts changed and identifying blind spots in their coverage. As night fell, an unexpected text arrived on my burner phone. Changed circumstances. Victor knows about me. Had to leave home. Staying at Harborview Hotel under maiden name. Still meeting tomorrow. Brought someone who can help Calvin. J. Julie's been compromised, I told Helen. Victor knows she was working with Uncle Charlie. Helen's expression tightened. This significantly increases the risk for tomorrow. If Westbrook is desperate enough to expose his inside source, he's preparing to eliminate all loose ends. My son included? She didn't answer directly, which was answer enough. Get some rest, she said instead. I'll take first watch. Sleep proved elusive, despite my exhaustion and pain medication. Around midnight, the security lights in my backyard suddenly illuminated. Helen materialized at my bedroom door. Someone's testing the perimeter, she whispered. Stay down. She disappeared into the darkness of the hallway. Minutes later, she returned. False alarm. Raccoon triggered the motion sensors, but something in her expression suggested it wasn't quite that innocent. What aren't you telling me? She hesitated, then sat on the edge of my bed. There are now 4 men outside, not 2, and they're armed with more than standard security equipment. They're preparing to take me by force, I realized. Possibly. Or they're expecting trouble tomorrow and increasing security accordingly. She checked her watch. Either way, we need to adjust our plan. I've contacted Dr. Torres. She'll meet us at Riverside Park directly, rather than at her bank. And the documents? Already with her nephew. He's arranging protective custody for you after tomorrow's meeting. The implication settled heavily between us. After tomorrow, I might never return to this house, this life. Everything would change, irrevocably. Will my son go to prison? I asked softly. Helen's professional detachment softened momentarily. That depends on what he chooses to do tomorrow, and how valuable his testimony is against Westbrook. As she left to continue her vigil, I found myself staring at the ceiling, thinking of Calvin as a child, his fierce concentration when building with blocks, his boundless curiosity, his absolute conviction that his mother could fix any problem. Somewhere along the way, that boy had become a man who believed money and status were worth compromising everything else. Tomorrow would determine whether anything of that boy remained, whether he would choose redemption or continue his descent into Victor Westbrook's corrupt world. Either way, the mother in me would grieve for what had been lost. Dawn arrived with a persistent drizzle that beaded on window panes and transformed my garden into a glistening tableau. Helen helped me dress in layers, practical clothing that would allow for movement despite my injuries. Each motion sent pain radiating through my healing ribs, but today, physical discomfort seemed trivial compared to what lay ahead. Victor called Calvin at 5:17 this morning, Helen reported, checking her phone. Dr. Torres has a contact in the phone company. The call lasted 6 minutes. Can we know what was said? She shook her head. Only that it happened. Calvin then made 2 calls, one to Julie's regular phone, which went unanswered, and one to a burner number, likely hers. I absorbed this information while Helen braided my hair, a style I hadn't worn in decades, but which she insisted was more practical for today's activities. The implication that I might need to move quickly hung unspoken between us. The security detail is preparing to follow us, she continued, glancing through the bathroom blinds. They're not even pretending to be subtle anymore. They believe we're going to Teresa's bank to retrieve documents, I reminded her. They'll expect that. Which gives us approximately 30 minutes of confusion when we go to the park instead. She handed me a pill and water. Anti-inflammatory, not pain medication. You need to be clear-headed. At precisely 9:15 a.m., we departed in Helen's nondescript sedan. The black SUVs pulled away from the curb before we'd reached the end of my street. 2 vehicles, 4 men, tracking us without pretense. They're maintaining distance but monitoring all turns, Helen observed, driving with the precise competence of someone who had likely experienced far more dangerous situations than this, exactly as expected. And Teresa? Already at Riverside Park with her nephew. They've secured the northern gazebo and have plainclothes officers nearby. She made a deliberately wrong turn, heading toward Teresa's bank as our surveillance would anticipate. Julie arrived at the park 10 minutes ago. No sign of Calvin yet. My heart constricted at the mention of my son. Had Victor's early morning call changed his tentative willingness to meet? Was he even now revealing our plans to his corrupt mentor? There's something you should prepare yourself for, Helen said, her voice gentling slightly. Your son may not come. Or worse, he may come with Westbrook's people. He'll be there, I said with more confidence than I felt. Whatever he's become, he's still my son. I have to believe there's a line he won't cross. Helen didn't contradict me, but her silence spoke volumes. As we approached the bank district, she abruptly turned onto a side street, accelerating through a yellow light that our followers couldn't make. By the time they redirected, we had switched roads twice and were heading toward Riverside Park from an unexpected direction. They'll figure it out quickly, Helen warned. We have maybe 10 minutes advantage. The park emerged before us, morning mist still clinging to the tree line along the river. Helen parked in the northwest lot, the one farthest from our destination. We walk from here, she said, helping me from the car. Stay close to the trees, where the sight lines are broken. With Helen supporting much of my weight, we moved through the damp parkland, following service paths rather than main walkways. The gazebo appeared through the mist, an elegant Victorian structure perched on a small rise overlooking the river. Teresa stood beneath its white-painted dome, alongside a serious-looking man in his 40s who could only be her nephew, Detective Rodriguez. No sign of Calvin or Julie. They're 5 minutes behind us, Teresa reported as we climbed the gazebo steps. Julie's inside that coffee shop across the street watching. She says Calvin texted that he's coming alone, but she can't verify. Detective Rodriguez stepped forward. Mrs. Lawson, we've reviewed the documents you provided. If even half of what's in there is accurate, Victor Westbrook is looking at multiple federal charges: securities fraud, wire fraud, bribery of public officials, tax evasion, possibly even racketeering. And my son? The detective's expression softened slightly. Depending on his level of involvement and willingness to cooperate, anything from probation to 15 years. The U.S. attorney is prepared to offer a deal, but only if he provides testimony against Westbrook. A slender figure emerged from the coffee shop across the street. Julie, wearing a baseball cap and oversized jacket that couldn't quite disguise her elegant bearing. She jogged toward the gazebo, constantly scanning her surroundings. "Calvin's coming," she announced, slightly breathless. "But something's wrong." He insisted on driving himself, refused to tell me his route, and sounded off. Off how? I asked. Like he was choosing his words carefully, like someone might be listening. She turned to Detective Rodriguez. "How quickly can you get more officers here?" "They're already in position," he assured her. 4 plainclothes throughout the park, SWAT on standby 3 blocks away. Helen, who had been monitoring the park entrances, suddenly stiffened. "Vehicle approaching. Black SUV, southeastern entrance." Our followers had caught up sooner than expected. "And another," Teresa reported, pointing toward the northern road. "Coming fast." Julie pulled out her phone. "Calvin isn't answering. I think—" She never finished the sentence. A 3rd vehicle entered from the west, Calvin's silver Audi, moving at precisely the speed limit, turning with mechanical precision into the nearest parking area. As it stopped, 4 black SUVs converged from different directions, boxing it in. "It's a trap," Helen stated flatly. "They used him as bait." The driver's door of Calvin's car opened. My son emerged, his face a mask of resignation and despair. Victor Westbrook stepped out from one of the SUVs, placing a paternal hand on Calvin's shoulder. Even from this distance, I could see the cold triumph in the older man's stance. "They have my son," I whispered. Detective Rodriguez was already speaking rapidly into his radio, mobilizing his officers. Julie had gone deathly pale, her eyes locked on Calvin's distant figure. "I need to go to him," I said, taking a step forward. Helen caught my arm. "That's exactly what Westbrook wants. He's using Calvin to draw you out." "I don't care," I replied, gently but firmly removing her hand. "He's my son." As I stepped away from the gazebo's shelter, Teresa grabbed my other arm. "Patrice, don't. It's too dangerous." "I've faced dangerous men before," I said, thinking of academic department politics that had once threatened my career, of my battle with cancer, of raising a son alone after my husband's death. None compared to this moment, but the principle remained the same. Fear could not be allowed to dictate my choices. "At least let me come with you," Julie pleaded, moving to my side. Detective Rodriguez spoke quickly into his radio before addressing us. "Mrs. Lawson, Ms. Bennett, if you insist on approaching, my officers will cover you, but I strongly advise waiting until SWAT arrives." "Every minute we wait gives Victor more control over my son," I replied. "You have the documents. Do what you need to do with them, but I'm going to Calvin now." Helen assessed the situation with professional detachment. They've positioned men at all park exits. They don't intend for anyone to leave until they have what they want. Which is? The documents, certainly. But also loose ends eliminated. Her eyes met mine directly. "You, Julie, possibly even Calvin at this point." I nodded, understanding the stakes with perfect clarity. "Then we don't give them time to implement whatever plan they've developed." Without waiting for further discussion, I began walking toward my son, Julie beside me. Behind us, I heard Detective Rodriguez coordinating with his team, Teresa arguing for more immediate intervention, Helen offering tactical advice. But my focus had narrowed to Calvin's distant figure, standing rigidly beside Victor Westbrook like a hostage at an execution. As we approached, I could see Victor more clearly. A tall, distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and the confident posture of someone accustomed to wielding power. His hand remained on Calvin's shoulder, in what might appear to casual observers as an avuncular gesture, but which I recognized instantly as restraint. "Mother, stop," Calvin called when we were about 20 yards away. "Go back." Victor smiled thinly. "Mrs. Lawson at last, and Ms. Bennett. How convenient to have both of you join us." Fisher and 2 other security men moved to flank us, effectively cutting off retreat. Julie tensed beside me, but I maintained my steady pace until we stood just feet from Calvin and Victor. "Let go of my son," I said quietly. "Your son works for me," Victor replied, his tone pleasant yet threaded with steel, "and has been exceptionally valuable, if occasionally misguided in his loyalties." Calvin wouldn't meet my eyes. His face was pale, jaw clenched with what might have been fear or anger or both. "We have a simple exchange to propose," Victor continued. You turn over all copies of Charles Whitmore's documents, sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, and everyone walks away intact. You keep your inheritance. Calvin keeps his career. Ms. Bennett keeps her law license. And if I decline? I asked, though we all knew the answer. Victor's smile didn't waver. Then things become unnecessarily complicated. Your accident demonstrated how dangerous the world can be for a woman of your age. Julie stepped forward, her professional demeanor asserting itself. Those documents are already with federal authorities, Mr. Westbrook. Securities fraud, wire fraud, bribery. The evidence is comprehensive. Something dangerous flickered in Victor's eyes. Then there's no reason not to give me your copies as well, is there, unless you're bluffing? I don't bluff, I said, and neither did my uncle. Victor's hand tightened on Calvin's shoulder. Your uncle was a delusional old man with a vendetta, and unfortunately, mental instability seems to run in your family. First Charles with his paranoid conspiracy theories, now you with your tragic accident and resulting confusion. The implied threat was clear. If I wouldn't cooperate, he would discredit me, perhaps have me declared incompetent, or worse. Calvin, I said, ignoring Victor to address my son directly. You have a choice to make, right now. My son finally looked at me, his expression tormented. It's not that simple, Mother. It is, Julie countered, her voice gentle but firm. Calvin, I've seen the evidence. This isn't just creative accounting. People have been hurt. Investors who lost everything. Employees whose pensions vanished. Real people with real lives. People die in business, Victor interjected coldly. The weak are separated from the strong. It's natural law. There's nothing natural about fraud, I replied, or attempted murder. Calvin flinched visibly at the word murder. His eyes darted to Victor, then back to me, a new wariness in his expression. I had nothing to do with your accident, Victor said smoothly. An overzealous security measure, completely unauthorized, like the men watching my house, like the 4 SUVs currently blocking the park exits. I gestured around us. This doesn't look like a business meeting, Victor. It looks like a criminal enterprise cornered by authorities. For the first time, uncertainty crossed Victor's features. His gaze swept the park, noticing perhaps for the first time the casual joggers who moved with too much purpose, the maintenance workers who paid too much attention to our confrontation. Calvin, Victor said sharply, it's time to demonstrate your loyalty. Tell your mother and your wife to cooperate or face the consequences. My son stood motionless, caught between the mentor who had shaped his professional identity and the mother who had raised him, the wife who had loved him despite knowing his flaws. What would Dad say if he could see you now? I asked softly, invoking the memory of the man who had taught Calvin to ride a bicycle, to stand up to bullies, to do what was right even when it was difficult. Something broke in Calvin's expression, the corporate mask cracking to reveal the boy I had raised, the man he might yet become. I can't do this anymore, he whispered, then louder. I can't do this. He stepped away from Victor's grasp. It's over. I'm done. Victor's face transformed, affable mentor vanishing in an instant to reveal something cold and reptilian. You ungrateful little parasite, he hissed at Calvin. I made you. Everything you have, everything you are, it came from me. Not everything, Calvin replied, his voice steadier now. He moved to stand beside Julie and me, physically crossing the divide. My conscience came from my parents. Fisher took a step forward, hand moving beneath his jacket toward what I could only assume was a concealed weapon. The other security men fanned out, creating a perimeter around us. This is your last chance, Victor said, his composure fracturing further. Return the documents, sign the agreements, and perhaps I'll consider allowing your son a future outside prison walls. It's too late for threats, Julie said. Look around you, Victor. Throughout the park, the seemingly casual visitors had stopped their pretense. The jogger by the fountain now held a police badge. The maintenance workers had positioned themselves strategically behind Victor's security team. Detective Rodriguez approached from the gazebo, flanked by uniformed officers. Victor's eyes darted from side to side, calculating odds, potential escapes. This changes nothing. I have connections your little police detective couldn't begin to comprehend. Judges, congressmen, regulatory officials, all in my pocket. That's why we went federal, Teresa said, joining us with Helen at her side. Your local connections can't help you with the Securities and Exchange Commission or the FBI. As if on cue, a convoy of black vehicles with federal insignia swept into the park, blocking the remaining exits. Men and women in windbreakers emblazoned with FBI poured out, moving with coordinated precision. Fisher reached for his weapon, but Helen moved with shocking speed for a woman her age, her hand snaking out to grasp his wrist in what must have been an excruciating hold. "I wouldn't," she said calmly, as Fisher's knees buckled. 20 years of military intelligence teaches you where the nerve clusters are. Detective Rodriguez stepped forward, badge extended. "Victor Westbrook, you're under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent." The methodical recitation of Miranda rights seemed to finally penetrate Victor's armor of invincibility. His shoulders slumped infinitesimally. Not surrender, but recognition that this battle, at least, was lost. As federal agents secured the scene, handcuffing Victor and his security team, Calvin turned to me. His eyes held a mixture of shame, regret, and something I hadn't seen in years. The vulnerability of my son seeking his mother's approval. "I'm sorry," he said simply, "for everything." "I know," I replied, reaching for his hand. "What happens now?" Julie stepped closer, her professional demeanor softened by evident relief. "Calvin has agreed to testify against Victor and the entire Westbrook operation. In exchange, the U.S. Attorney is offering a reduced sentence." "How reduced?" I asked, needing to understand exactly what my son faced. 18 months in a minimum security facility," Calvin answered before Julie could, followed by 3 years of supervised release. The numbers hit me like physical blows. 18 months. My son would spend a year and a half in prison. Yet considering the alternative, the decades behind bars he might have faced without cooperation, it represented mercy. "When?" My voice cracked on the single syllable. "After the trial," Julie explained gently, "which could take a year to begin. Calvin will remain under house arrest until then." Detective Rodriguez approached, nodding respectfully to me, before addressing Calvin. "Mr. Lawson, the federal agents need to take your preliminary statement now." Calvin squeezed my hand once before releasing it. "I need to do this," he said, more to himself than to me. Then, with straightened shoulders, he walked toward the waiting federal agents. "He'll be okay," Julie assured me, watching him go. "The prosecutor said his cooperation is extraordinarily valuable. They'll honor the agreement." I nodded, unable to speak past the knot in my throat. Victory and loss had become so entangled, I couldn't separate them. Helen materialized at my side with a wheelchair. "You should sit, Ms. Lawson. Your body has been through enough trauma today." As I sank gratefully into the chair, Teresa tucked a blanket around my legs against the morning chill. "It's over, Patrice," she said softly. "You did it. Charlie would be proud." I watched as Victor was led to a waiting vehicle, his imperious bearing incongruous with the handcuffs binding his wrists. Our eyes met briefly across the distance. In his gaze, I saw not defeat, but a cold promise of retribution. A man calculating future moves even as his current game collapsed around him. "It's not over," I murmured. "Not completely." Julie followed my gaze and nodded grimly. "Men like Victor Westbrook don't surrender easily, but he's facing multiple federal charges with overwhelming evidence and cooperative witnesses. Even his connections can't make this disappear." As we made our way back toward the parking area, I glanced at the gazebo where everything had culminated. In just 10 days, my life had transformed completely. Inheritance, accident, betrayal, and now this fragile resolution. "What will you do?" Teresa asked as Helen helped me into the car. "After the trial, I mean." I considered the question, watching through the window as Calvin spoke with federal agents, Julie at his side. My son's future would include prison, public disgrace, professional ruin, and yet he stood straighter now than he had beside Victor, as if the weight of deception had been heavier than the burden of consequences would be. "I'll use Uncle Charlie's money the way he would have wanted," I said finally. "A foundation for education and ethics in business. Something good should come from all this." "And Calvin?" Teresa asked gently. I thought of my son as a child, determined, brilliant, compassionate, before the world taught him to value other things. That boy was still there, beneath the layers of compromise and ambition. "He'll need to rebuild," I said, "and I'll be there to help him. That's what mothers do." As we drove away from Riverside Park, leaving federal agents to process the scene, I felt a curious lightness despite my injuries, despite the challenges ahead. The truth, however painful, had finally emerged into the light. And in that light, healing could begin. For Calvin, for Julie, for me. Uncle Charlie had entrusted me with his legacy, knowing it would shatter lives. But perhaps, in that shattering, something stronger might eventually emerge.